Why, hello there, Exile. Today we'll be taking a look at the upgraded version of our strength stacking Venom Gyre build. Before we get into that, let's quickly refresh how a strength stacker works. Replica Elberon boots, which give us chaos attack damage per strength. Then we grab Iron Will, which lets strength also apply to spell damage. We use Iron Fortress chest piece to give 3 times the effectiveness of strength. It also gives us block per strength, which allows us to get block capped really easily. Since we're block capped, we don't really need evasion. We use Balormage's Cry to convert the spell damage into generic percent attack damage, scaling our chaos. Because Balormage's Cry scales with Battle Cry effect, we walk away with 6 times the normal strength scaling as generic. Now, you might be worried about having to maintain the uptime on the War Cry. As long as the skill is non-melee, or if it's attached to multi-strike, it will not exert, and you'll get the spell damage to attack scaling for the full duration. Then we just grab the instant node, put it on left click, then it just auto triggers for us. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. It is also worth noting that strength on its own only gives melee physical, and with Iron Grip, it only gives physical attack damage. That's why we have to go through this whole loop of converting the full way. When you're doing any stacker like this, levels are incredibly important. Don't expect the build to come together till at least somewhere around 90 to 95, but ideally you want to get even more levels than that. One of the major changes we made to the build was adding extra projectiles using the Fan Jewel with Life Leech and a Fan Jewel with Mana Leech. This took our projectiles from 3 to 5. Additionally, there is an extra projectile on the skill tree, but it requires a slightly different pathing, which means you would run a 4-property jewel instead of split personalities. Extra projectiles do a few things for us. It increases the amount of return projectiles, which all damage, if we're positioned correctly, hit the target. But it also increases the rate at which we get to that 40 projectile stored cap for Whirling Blades. So basically, we're collecting all these blades. When we Whirling Blade, it shoots 40 projectiles out if we have them all. And if we're really near the target when we Whirling Blade, it'll shotgun the target with all those projectiles. We also bought an Original Sin, so now we have a better helm that adds flat cold, and also a strength stacking claw. Original Sin converts all damage into chaos. You cannot use these without because the boots state that you can only deal chaos damage. There are downsides to adding Original Sin. One of the main ones is we lose life gain on hit implicit from the claw. To remedy this, and because we are not using Mage Blood, we got a Watcher's Eye to give us life gain on hit and a flash charge on crit. The flash charge on crit lets us gain 1 flash charge every 100 milliseconds, allowing us to have really good uptime on our flats. While we are demoing it here without Headhunter, we mostly played it with Headhunter for mapping. When Headhunter ramps up, especially with Soul Eater, we run into a pretty big negative on this build, which is that our FPS goes to absolute crap, and the game just cannot handle all the projectiles and all the calculations that are going on with the chains and the forks and all that good stuff. We even tried removing the chain ascendancy, and it still ran into the same issue. Because of these issues, I prefer Smite of Divine Judgment Berserker over this build, which will be showcasing in the future. The main plus for this build, though, is the coverage for bossing, but the new Smite of the Divine Judgment is actually quite competitive with it. Overall, I'm really happy how this character turned out, and it was able to do what we needed it to do, which is mostly farm the Feared for several days so we can print Divines to farm other builds. Currently, magic finding is all the hype, and you're probably wondering, is it possible to run some quantity and rarity in this build? While we cannot wear the 20% increased item quantity boots, because of course we require Replica Elberon, we can add a bit. We can run 1 Venter's Gamble Ring, preferably with percent strength corruption. We could run a gold flask with 30% rarity craft. And lastly, we have enough damage that we can actually drop one of our supports to run an item rarity support, probably instead of crit strike chance support. If you really want to go hog wild, you can get a helm with rarity as a prefix and drop crit multi or strength suffix, and then use the item rarity for rares and uniques. I guess you technically could also run Sedemas, if you're an absolute madman or woman. Considering how important strength is though for this build, that is definitely not recommended. You may also be wondering, is it possible to run this build without Original Sin? Because it is so darn expensive. In fact, it's almost a mirror now. And the answer is definitely yes. We didn't even get Original Sin until after we were farming Feared with Uber Cortex for a week. I have included a POB in the description with all the updated recommendations for that setup. Without Original Sin, we need to worry about monster resist, so we need to run Despair, and, if possible, a minus Chaos Res Helm for nearby enemies. Speaking of Despair, there's a really good item you can pick up from Sanctum called the Balance of Terror that gives you a 100% chance to wither for 2 seconds for 10 seconds after you cast Despair. If you can afford it, it is highly advisable that you run this jewel, because otherwise we're relying on chance to wither from our That Which Was Taken. And in fact, with this jewel, you could drop that out of the That Which Was Taken. On the Original Sin version, since we only have one curse or mark, we just cast Despair and then let our mark override it. For the non-Original Sin version, we would pick up Whispers of Doom so that we can cast both. It's worth noting that the Balance of Terror requires you to manually cast Despair and does not work if you automate it.